if anyone would look in the Torah scroll this week, you would find something fascinating. Now, every new Torah portion either starts the beginning of a line, has a new paragraph, an indent, a couple spaces. This week, believe it or not, if you would just look at the Torah, you wouldn't so easily be able to identify where this Torah portion is starting from. And that is because there's no extra space, there's no indent, when you type, there's no tab, there's no enter, new paragraph. It's just all right stuck in the middle as if you would have never paid attention to it. And obviously, the question is why? The Zohar asks this question and gives no less than 3 answers. Rashi asks this question, and he gives the first answer of the Zohar, and he gives another answer. So what are these answers? So the Zohar's first answer is in the name of Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yaakov says that when Jacob passed away, the eyes of the Jewish people were dimmed and shut. What does that mean? It was obviously a very sad moment when Jacob, the final patriarch, passed away. But what did he provide? He provided a scholarship of Torah which was specific to the patriarchs. Of course, Joseph and Moses and the further generations all had their connection. But there's nothing like a connection of a patriarch. And after the trilogy of patriarchs is now no more, Jacob being the last, it was very sad, very hard, and there was unfortunately some type of a disconnect once Jacob passed away. The illumination of the Torah and the concepts and the understanding of the Torah were dimmed down, shut to a certain degree. That's what it means that the eyes of Bnei Israel, of the people, of the children of Israel, were shut. It's number 1. Second answer is given by Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Judah says that when Jacob passed away, that's when the Jewish people really fell into exile. Now, physically, the Jewish people were in exile 17 years prior when Jacob entered the land of Israel with all of his family. But really, the exile started when when Jacob passed away. Now, we only know, based on what we're going to learn next week, for those who will join, that the Jewish people only started being oppressed and suffering only when Joseph and his brothers passed away. Because Jacob was Jacob, but there's still Jacob's sons. Yeah, and there's Joseph. Joseph was the viceroy himself. So not too much was able to be done when Jacob's sons and the viceroy Joseph was still alive. But afterwards, there was. So what was the difference? So the Maharal from Prague, if any of you have heard of him, he was very, very famous and prolific commentator on the Torah. He writes that when Jacob passed away, before Joseph and his brothers passed away, there were like sporadic and spontaneous acts of oppression, but nothing regular and regimented. Only after Joseph and his brothers passed away did it become a norm and a regular and a regiment that the Jewish people were being oppressed and they were put at the hands of the suffering of the Egyptians. That was the difference. But, so the second answer the Zohar gives is that when Jacob passed away, the oppression and the exile start. Listen to the third answer. I like the third answer the best. Listen to what Rabbi Shimon says. He says, the reason why there is no indent, there's no tab, there's no space, there's no new paragraph between last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion is to come to show us that the last concept that is said is continuing through to the first concept. The last verse in last week's Torah portion is continuing to the first week of the first portion, the first verse in this week's Torah portion. And listen to what it says. Last week, the last verse would be in chapter 47, verse 27. It says as follows. Vayeshev Israel be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. Israel, referring to Jacob, with his family, find their place of living, their abode in Egypt, in the land of Goshen. That was where Joseph specifically set his family to be, away from the metropolitan and all of that tum'ah, the impurity and the physical attractions that there were. He set them aside to be gazers, to be shepherds. Now listen to what it says. Vayechazu ba, vayifru vayirbu me'od. And they inhabited it, and they took holding of the land, and they multiplied, and they were fruitful very, very much. What does the Zohar say that means? The Zohar says that the Jewish people finally started living good. They lived like kings. They were happy. They had land. They had children. They had their homes. They had their, as we would say, their little ghetto, their little shtetl, which is a beautiful thing. It was only amongst friends and families. There was no crime ratings, and there was nothing hard to do. Everything was pretty good and simple. And how long was that for? That was for 17 years. That was from when Jacob came into the land until he passed away. The first verse in this week's Torah portion tells us, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. Jacob lives in the land of Egypt for 17 years. And Vayehi Yemei Yaakov shenei chayav 7 shanim ve'arba'im u'mat shana. And Jacob's total life from when the time when he passed away was 147 years old. So he came in at 130 and he passes away 17 years later at 147. The Zohar says, what's the connection? Why is there no space? Why is there no new paragraph? To show us that just as the Jewish people finally lived like kings and they were enjoying their life, this was the only time in Jacob's life that he was enjoying his life. Think of Jacob's life. His whole childhood, he was battling and butting heads with his good-for-nothing twin brother. Had such a hard time. Till finally, he found a way to get his blessing, and then he had to skip town. He was on the run. He was in a good-for-nothing father-in-law's house who was swindling him day after day. And then he leaves, and then he meets his brother. He's very petrified about that meeting. And then he has the unfortunate case of his daughter being raped. And then he gets home and he has more issues. He tries to relax. Joseph gets taken away from him. After Joseph goes away, then there's the whole scandal with Judah and him sleeping with his daughter-in-law unknowingly. And then there were 2 kids. Like, think of it. This man's life was not a pleasant one. The Zohar is telling us, you know why there's no new paragraph? The reason is because Jacob is finally living his life. And ends off with one more nice thing. How many years did Jacob have with Joseph before Joseph was taken away? 17 years. How many years? And those, by the way, were, besides for the last 17 years of his life, the second best 17. Because that's when he finally was able to have a child with the love of his life, with Rachel. And he was able to learn and study with him and give everything he knew from his father and grandfather and from the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever over to his son. And then his son was taken away. So there was those 17 years. God tells him, don't worry, we'll give you another 17. 17 the first time when Joseph was taken away, and now another 17 together with Joseph, viewing him as a king, as a viceroy, as a ruler, as a good person. Even though you're away from him for 22 years, you will see that all of your investment of those first 17 years will pay off in these next and these last 17 years. Something I'll add from myself. So again, the concept of why there's no paragraph, no new, the Zohar says we're connecting the last verse and the first verse. Jacob's living now. He's having a good life now, finally. If we look at the numerical value of 17, it is also 17, take the number 17, it also corresponds to the Hebrew word Tov. Tov means good. Jacob's first set of good years was the first 17 years of Joseph's life. It was snatched from him. He was waiting for good. God said, don't worry, you're not going to pass away until you have another good, another Tov years, another 17 years with Jacob. That's just as an introduction to, if you'll open up the scroll, either coming up Thursday or Shabbat morning, you're not going to be able to find so easily the beginning of this week's Torah portion. Now you know why. Gave 3 answers. The Midrash tells us that our forefathers were destined to each live 180 years. Nice number, huh? Even Moses didn't live 180 years. So let's take our patriarchs. Abraham lived till 175. Why did he have minus 5 years? Well, the Midrash tells us God did Abraham a favor. He took 5 years away from him. He made him pass away 5 years premature in order that he wouldn't have to witness with his own eyes his grandson, Esav, commit terrible and horrible sins. Abraham was 160 years old when the twins were born, and at the age of 15, Esav was an outright sinner, transgressor, doing everything in the name of the book: stealing, murdering, blasphemy, more inappropriate things with the opposite gender we can obviously imagine. No good things. All of this was on his 15th birthday, the same day that Abraham passes away 5 years early. So we understand Abraham. Now let's look at Isaac, our second patriarch. How old was he when he passed away? Take a lucky guess. 180 years old. Beautiful. So he lived to his fullest potential, time-wise. Now let's look at Jacob. Jacob passes away at 147. If we do the math, that is 33 years shy of what he was supposed to be prescribed. That's not fair. What's going on? So the Dat Zikinim, the commentary on our Torah, he tells us why. He says, at 130 years old, when Jacob is brought to Paro by Joseph to introduce his father, Paro asks Jacob a question. And I'll quote to you the verse. This verse is fascinating. This is in chapter 47, verses 8 and then 9 is Jacob's response. Vayomer Paro el Yaakov. Paro tells Jacob, Kama yemei shenei chayecha. How many are the days of the years of your life? Okay, we're not going to get into how, if I ask you, I'm going to ask you, how old are you? How many years are you? How many days? But not how many days of years are you? So obviously Paro was expecting that such a great and honorable man lived his life to its fullest. So how many are the days of the years of your life? That's not what we want to pay attention to. Now look at what Jacob's answer is. And this is what our commentaries say Jacob was punished for. Vayomer Yaakov el Paro. Jacob tells Paro, Yemei shenei megurai sheloshim u'ma'at shana. The days of the years of my life are 130 years. Me'at v'ra'im. They are short and bad. Hayu yemei shenei chayai. They're not such great years, my life. V'lo higu et yemei shenei chayai avotai. And I haven't lived to the same number of years as my ancestors, as my father and my grandfather, bimei migurehem, in the years of their life. Jacob was complaining. We mentioned a moment ago what Jacob had to complain about. He really had the hardest life. Harder than Abraham, for sure harder than Isaac. Now they had their own hurdles and struggles, but Jacob had it the hardest. On one aspect he had what to complain about. But the commentaries say, what are you telling for the first time that you're meeting the world leader, Paro? What are you complaining to him about? If you count the words, There's 33 words in these verses. And those 33 words correspond to the 33 years that were deducted from Jacob's life. But now take a moment. What do Jews like? To question, right? If I count the words, I'm going to count them for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I only have 25 words in Jacob's answer. Where's 33? We're 8 words short. What's going on? So look at this. If you count Paro's question also, you have another 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that gives you 33. And now we're ready to rip our hair out of our head and say, well, how come is Paro's words counting against Jacob? Let Jacob be accountable for the 25 words of complaint that he had. Or the 25 words, the way the Torah describes Jacob's complaint. Why Paro as well? So listen to, in my opinion, a secret in life and a secret on how a person can really feel young, feel good, and look good. Okay? Listen to the following. Jacob, at this point in his life, at 130 years old. Now to us, when we think 130, we think saggy and wrinkly and hunched over, and if we're lucky, even able to be pushed in a wheelchair, never mind walking around. But go back to those times. 130 was, okay, you're approaching retirement age. Approaching. You still were good enough to work. But what triggered Paro to ask Jacob the question was because he looked a lot older than he should have looked at that time. He looked like he was 230 years old. And Paro's doing the math. Well, based on all the time I spent with your son Joseph and all he's told to me about you and all the greatness and even your age range, you don't look like you should be 230 or 330, however old you look. You should be looking in your lower hundreds. Good and strong and well before retirement. Jacob was punished for even allowing and opening the door for Paro to ask him that question. So even those 8 words in the verse, which is Paro asking Jacob the question, Jacob is held accountable for Paro's asking those questions. And why? What was Jacob's fault? Unfortunately, at his super high level. Now, when we say these things that I'm about to say, we're not saying them to criticize him. We're saying, take him on that high level and let's apply it to our level. On his level, he did not live with enough faith. He did not live with enough happiness. He was very sad. He was torn for the past 22 years. In the past 22 years, he aged probably 220 years. Because his poor wife passed away, Rachel, at the birth of Benjamin. And then all the other hard things we just spoke about. His son was kidnapped and thought that he was killed. It was very, very hard for him. But at his level, he didn't live with the happiness. He didn't live with enough faith that was needed or requested from him at his high level to live with. So physically and morally, definitely emotionally, he was running himself down. You want the secret? To look good? To feel young? Be happy. Live with faith. As hard as your day was, how's it going? You know what the word you should say? It's one word.
Great.
Amazing. Great's not good enough. Good's not good enough. I'll go further. Fine is not good. Good is not good enough. Great, you're getting there. Amazing means you're enthusiastic and happy about everything that is happening to your life, in your life. And you want to know another secret? If you keep on saying it, it will be true. Tell yourself, look in the mirror when you wake up and say, I am young, I look good, I am strong, I am happy, I'm doing amazing. You're gonna be. Now, make sure whatever time you're doing it, your kids are already up, or your wife's up, or your husband's up, or else you're not gonna be doing too amazing. But look in that mirror and say, I got the power. I can do it. Make yourself goals, be positive about it, and go and do it. If your motto is amazing, if your motto is you're young, and that you're happy, you will be. It's the power of the brain. It's the power of our minds. It's something that at Jacob's level, he was somewhat lacking. He missed a part of it. At our lower levels, I guess it could be even superficial. You could fake it till you make it. That's good too. That's fine. As long as you get there. As long as you're able to really one day sit down and say, I'm doing amazing and I'm happy. But do that along the way as well. That's something Jacob missed. If we look at the first verse of this week's Torah portion, the Zera Shimshon asks a most powerful question. And he says, well, the Torah is telling me how long Jacob's life was, which was 147 years. Okay, normally when you're giving a eulogy or you put an obituary, that's what's going on over here. The Torah is putting an obituary for Jacob. That's it, the guy passed away. The next verse, the Torah tells us that Jacob asks his son Joseph to do him a favor and make sure that he gets buried in Israel in Me'arat HaMachpelah. What does that mean? Did he pass away or not? Okay. Further, go on, and the Torah tells us later on, Vayechi acharei advarim ha'ele, after all of what has happened, Vayomer leYosef, it's told to Joseph that his father is getting sick. And then Joseph takes his sons to be blessed by his father. The Midrash tells us, whenever there's a terminology of acharei hadvarim, after these things, it means that it was a long time that passed. If so, when the Torah is telling us at the beginning of this week's Torah portion that Jacob lived till 147, and then Jacob makes Joseph promise him he'll bury him in Israel, after these things, he gets ill. So a long time after. It could be a month, it could be 12 months, who knows how long. Then Jacob gets ill. Then Joseph is told to come and visit him, brings his children for blessing, and then Jacob blesses each and every one of his children. The Zera Shimshon asks, shouldn't the Torah be telling us how old Jacob was when he passes away, and not prior to when he passes away? It's very, very weird. I'm not going to say Mr. So-and-so passed away at the age of 147, and then you tell us a bunch of things about this person as if it's happening now. That's what the Torah does. The Zera Shimshon begs to know why. The Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, page 5b, tells us something spooky. It tells us that Jacob never passed away. Very nice. That's so great.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Very good. What does that mean? Jacob never passed away? 1 second. Didn't they have a eulogy, a burial? I think even prior to that, they mummified him. And he never died? So listen to one of the main commentaries on the Talmud, the Parashat. He gives a beautiful explanation. He says, of course, Jacob's physical body passed away. but his spirit, his soul, did not. But what does that mean? And furthermore, is it only that it didn't happen to Jacob? What about Abraham? What about Isaac? Something specific by Jacob? Oh yes, he explains. What it means when a person's body passes away but their spirit and their soul continues to live on means that the parent, that Jacob, continued to live intimately and independently with each and every one of his children, grandchildren, and future descendants. What was specific about Jacob compared to Abraham and Isaac? Is that Jacob was able to do that to all and with all of his descendants. Abraham couldn't. He had one sour son, Ishmael, and one amazing son, Isaac. Isaac couldn't. He had one sour son, Esav, and one amazing son, Jacob. All of Jacob's children were righteous and special and connected in their own way. And Jacob committed himself that after his body passes away at 147, he continued to live on with them and their future descendants forever. And what does that mean? That means that he'd be with them in their times of happiness, their times of sorrow, struggle, hurdles, great occasions, milestones. He'd be there blessing them, watching over them, guarding them. That's something that was specific to Jacob. So the Zera Shimshon says, the same way that the Torah tells us Jacob passes away at 147, then continues to tell us many more things and occurrences that happened during his life, it shows us that the same way he never really passed away, even when the Torah said he passed away, so too when he really physically passed away, he never really died. The Zera Shimshon says that this verse is actually a proof for the statement in the Talmud. The Talmud says Jacob never passed away, and his proof is this verse, the beginning of this week's Torah portion, that it speaks about Jacob's timeline, his passing at 147, but then it tells us so many more things and details about his life. He never passed away then, he never passed away later, he always continued. And for us, as descendants of Jacob, we're called Bnei Israel. We're not the Bnei Avraham, we're certainly not Bnei Noach, not Bnei Yitzchak, we're not even Bnei Moshe. We're Bnei Israel. Who's Israel? Israel is Jacob. That was the name that first the angel blessed him with, and then God blessed him with. Jacob is our guardian angel. He's our Father in heaven, which is intimately involved in every aspect of our lives, watching over us. Anytime we do something good, can you imagine he's looking down and saying, that's my descendant, that's my child, and vice versa. May we live up to what it means to be a true descendant of Israel, of Jacob, a true Ben or Bas Israel.